So once again, thank you for joining. And so today we're going to be talking about the new data set, which hit the Researcher Workbench yesterday. This is Dataset version 6. So as I said, it was introduced on the 23rd. It updates both the registered tier and the control tier. So now the new data cutoff date for this data set is going to be January 1st, 2022. So it's going to include everything from the beginning up into this date. And then also a new highlight about this data set too, before we move on, is that it's using a new OMOP structure, or an updated one, version 5.3.1. So what are we going to cover today? So here are some of the questions and points we're going to hit. What are the new data? What are the differences between the old and the new data sets? What are some helpful resources about this new data? And then also, how do I access the new data with the new features? So first, you may be asking, what are the new data and how does it compare to the previous data sets? So like I said, this new data refresh affects all three of our current tiers because it is a new CDR entirely. The public tier on the public website, the data browser, is going to be reflective of this new data set, the registered tier and the control tier as well. So here are some of the new numbers that are incorporated into this data set. As you can see, so we've across the board increased the participant count. We now have over 372,000 survey responses, over 300,000 physical measurements, and we've surpassed the 250,000 mark of participants with electronic health records. And if you want to see a little bit of a comparison of, the previous data set version 5 and what we have now version 6, this kind of just shows you a little bit. As you can see, we saw over a 40,000 participant data increase and overall from March into June. Another big highlight is an increase of over 1,000 participants in the Fitbit data, which I know is a big, data that's being researched currently. Some more highlights about this new data set and some of the new incorporations into it. Not only do we increase the number of participant data, but we also increase the type of data that we have available. So two things I want to highlight is two new surveys we have incorporated: social determinants of health, and then also the minute survey on COVID-19 vaccines. So some highlights about the social determinants of health survey. So this was launched in November 2021. So we have more than 57,000 responses to this survey currently. And so this survey takes into account all the aspects of a participant's experience outside of receiving medicine or healthcare. Additionally, health is influenced by more than just medicine. And with the help of this survey, we are able to capture that now. So next is going to be just some additions and highlights to general COVID-19 data in total, and then the addition of that COVID-19 minute survey. So speaking more general to COVID-19 data, the new CDR contains nearly 20,000 participants reporting the SARS-CoV, and this is going to be reflected in genomic data, clinical EHR data, and then also, like I said, the minute surveys as well as the COPE surveys. And then speaking specifically to the new minute COVID-19 response vaccine survey, we have over 132,000 responses to that. And so these are perspectives on the vaccine and vaccination status and plans. Some more updates specifically to genomics. So this is going to be more about the features, and we'll also have Shimon later on the call to speak more about this too as well. But so for array sample updates, we now have some new additions, one being in the variant call files, or the VCFs. We have intensity data files, IDATs, an update to the Hale matrix table and the Planck bed files. For whole genome sequencing data, we have updates to the VCFs as well as a Hale matrix table. We are introducing in this data set CRAM files to whole genome sequencing samples. And then also some additional updates to files are the auxiliary file, the QC file, and the annotations. And so I just like to highlight this slide here to give you a reference of, genomic data has been a huge incorporation into the data set, but it doesn't just stop with genomics. You can incorporate that across the board with most of our data too as well. So like you can see in the top line, we have 81,000 participants have whole genome sequencing data along with electronic health record, physical measurements, and survey responses. And as you can see, this was about 4,000 participant increase since our last data set. And then another thing I want to make sure to point out here is that, with the increase of our data set, we still were able to keep that huge part of our program being the diversity aspect and representing the underrepresented in biomedical research. So as you can see, even though our total numbers increased, our percents as far as representing the underrepresented have stayed consistent. So now that we've kind of spoken about the data and the new features, we want to talk to you about what are some helpful resources, using this data, learning more about it before you begin analyzing it. So you're going to find all of those resources within our user support hub, which you can access from the drop-down menu of the Researcher Workbench in the top left corner. When you select user support hub, it'll take you to an external site and the landing page will look like the screenshot to the right. So now I'm going to kind of walk through some of these new articles or articles that we've updated, which are definitely going to give you some insight and help into this new dataset version 6. So speaking generally about the dataset itself, we have 2 new articles encompassing the release notes about this. So we have a general June 2022 data refresh development release notes article, and then also one that gets a little more specific in the Curated Data Repository release notes. Both of these can be found in our announcements section of the user support hub. There's also another article that encompasses the CDR cutoff dates, and it's not just the cutoff dates for this data set, but it'll be the previous ones as well. We also have the controlled CDR directory. We have added another article that lists all the pre-installed tools on the Researcher Workbench. And then we also have our data dictionaries for the curated data repositories. So now to taper our resources more specifically down to the surveys and those 2 new surveys that we incorporated. So 2 articles that will help you much in this endeavor is going to be the Social Determinants of Health follow-up survey details and resources, and the COVID-19 related survey series details and resources. Both of these articles can be found in the survey section of the user support hub. Next, we're going to highlight the resources specific to genomic data. So with the change in data set, we have updated the article of how all of us genomic data are organized, as well as the quality report around genomic data. And the controlled CDR directory also incorporates some of the new information about the genomic data. And then just some more articles to highlight is going to be accessing genomic data in the All of Us control tier. Then it's going to be using the Integrative Genomics Viewer, IGV. And then also how do you select specific variants. And so one more thing I wanted to point out is that we do understand as researchers that, especially working with genomic data, these projects can take a extended amount of time. And so if you started your project in a previous data set, we wanted to let you know that you are still able to work in that data set as well as access the resources that were specified for that data set as well. So within the genomics section of the user support hub, we have an archive section, and that is where you can find all of those previous data set resources and information detailed around the previous data sets. So that way, you are getting accurate information particular to what you're working on. So now I'm going to pass it over to Shimon, and he's going to speak a little bit about how do I access the data with the new features.
Thanks, Gage. And just a bit of context here. This is really about accessing the genomic data. So you can access the the phenotypic data through through our cohort builder and dataset builder tools. You can access it directly in the Google Cloud BigQuery dataset that holds all of that data in those OMOP format tables. But then we also have our genomic data, which is presented as a collection of files that are accessible through a Google Cloud Storage bucket. And that bucket, which we call the CDR bucket, CDR is our curated data repository. That CDR bucket that holds all the genetic data files, both the ones that were available previously, like VCF files, Plink bed files, things like that, and the brand new resources like the collection of IDAT and CRAM files offering sequencer read data. That bucket's configuration has changed a bit. And there are 2 ways that configuration has changed. You may have seen some emails about this and some notifications on the site as well. First of all, we've made that bucket use this setting called requester pays. Basically, what requester pays means is that any of the storage fees, the All of Us program pays for those storage fees. But when you use the data in that bucket, you pay any data egress, download and access charges at the time of use. The main reason for us to turn on this requester pays setting is actually connected to the release of CRAMs. This says for future data, but the slide was written in the past before we had actually released CRAMs. So the CRAM files are large, and we don't expect them to be quite as frequently used as the other files. So we've been able to optimize the program's cost for storing those files by using what's called nearline storage. And what that means is that those files cost less to store on an ongoing basis, but they cost a little more to use. And so those usage charges will now be billed to the researchers, the projects using that data. So that'll come out of your cloud credits, just like it would if you ran a virtual machine within your workspace in the All of Us Researcher Workbench. The other change is that the bucket has changed from a multi-region bucket to a single region. This is something that probably will affect no one right now, but will potentially save some money come October. The reason for this change is that Google has announced some pricing changes to the use of data in multi-region buckets that makes them a lot less appealing for us. And so by using buckets in a single region, and most of the services that our users run are run in the same region anyway, this will avoid running into the same charges in October. So I see a question from Krishnamurthy Subramanian in the chat asking about, can we download VCF or CRAM data, say for 100 with Tourette's syndrome? You can certainly get that data. You can analyze it in the workbench. Any genomic data, just like the phenotypic data, is subject to the same restrictions on the use of that data. So any individual level data, not aggregated to sort of the minimum bucket size required by the program, does still have to be analyzed in the Researcher Workbench. So in the context of the Researcher Workbench, right, you can create a virtual machine, you can download VCFs or CRAMs onto that machine and run the tools of your choice on that machine, but those cannot be downloaded outside of the Researcher Workbench environment. All right, next slide, please. For any use of VCF or other genomic data that was released prior to just a couple of days ago, the cost impact should be very negligible. If you are using CRAMs, so those are the files that are stored in nearline storage, you will pay some retrieval fees. So those fees are about 20 cents per CRAM file if you're downloading that whole 20 gigabyte CRAM file. If for some reason you're running compute in another region, you may pay egress fees. This is a pretty unlikely thing to do, but it is technically possible. And then there are also some very, very small API operation costs. So these are things like listing out what files are available in the bucket, or how large they are. Each of those operations has a pretty small cost. It's on the order of 1 cent to 10 cents per 10,000 operations. So again, very negligible, but you may find that if you do things like, for example, try to list out all of the files in the bucket recursively, that is a lot of files that actually take some time and might have a small cost. There's not much reason you would want to do that, but just for your reference, that is something that could have a mild cost impact. And most important thing really is that with the requester pays setting, any access to the bucket does require that the project provides, that you provide essentially like which project should I bill to, in addition to which project am I getting the data out of. So in many of the tools that people use in the workbench, notably in Hail, these settings actually are passed through automatically, so you don't have to change anything in your code. But if you do see a message that says something like bucket is a requester pays bucket, but no project specified, you will need to likely add a parameter in some way specific to your tool. And our documentation has some of the details on what you might need to add if you do see that message. All right, that's it for me.
Great, thank you for sharing all that, Shimon. So we do have one more thing I do want to show to everybody before we open it up for questions. That's going to be two new funding opportunities that we are promoting. As you can see, they are approaching. One of them is in the next few days. So we do understand that, this is so near, but we do also want to let you guys know, encourage you that although these are two opportunities we have available now, we do hope in the future to promote and include more funding opportunities as well. but just going to leave this up here for a second for you guys to view. Both of them are NIH related. And with that, that is going to conclude the presentation we do have for you guys today. I'm going to end the recording now, and then we'll open it up for questions.